Greetings, this is a movie recap of The Boy in Our Cemetery. Don't forget to support the channel with your likes and subscriptions. Keep your eyes open and stay focused. On a chilly night, a cemetery guard takes a hard-boiled egg, which is usually placed on the grave of a dead person in Russia, and smashes it over his face on the monument and then eats it. But when he hears laughter among the trees and notices the girl behind him, he heads for the lodge as quickly as possible. And even from there, out of fear, he jumps out of the window and runs away wherever he can see. After a while, provincial guy Nikolai comes to Moscow, where he was called to work by his uncle Vasily. Nikolai came to work as a security guard, and as he found out in the car, he will be working at the cemetery. Already at the cemetery, his uncle asked him to be as polite as possible to visitors, because they are their breadwinner, because they leave valuables and food. He also jokes that he shouldn't leave the trail after sunset, because the dead will drag him away. And at the lodge, he gets ready for his first day at work and swaps nude pictures for pictures of his father, because he is a role model for him. Then he prepares for the night by hanging traps and taking pictures of the state of the monuments and himself at the same time. When night falls, he is on the phone with his grandmother. And when he turns on the lights, there is a girl waiting for him at the gate, whom he lets walk through the cemetery to his house and decides to accompany her. On the way, they discuss the essence of his work, and already at another exit from the cemetery he invites her to chevreks, the national dish of Russians. And before dinner his traps go off and he runs out into the street. His inspection reveals green eyes in the bushes, but it turns out to be an ordinary dog. And when he returns to the cabin, he finds more dogs, so he decides to feed them all. And apparently he's not going to eat today, because now the lights go out, but when he goes outside, there's no one there. In the morning, he takes an impromptu shower, and when his uncle refuses to let him buy a gun, he decides to make a homemade bat with nails. In the meantime, he notices a strange man and follows him. It turns out to be a local alcoholic who has written in his notebook the dates of birth and death of everyone in the cemetery to come and drink vodka. Nikolai gives him half an hour to satisfy his needs, but after a while his wife comes and Nikolai lets her in to find him. But when the alcoholic returns, he tells him that his wife died 3 years ago and prompts him that woman steals flowers and sells them by the roadside. Nikolai goes to her and takes her flowers before breaking her counter. When he returns the flowers, twin brother of the buried shows up and asks the kid to leave them alone. But when he returns to the cabin, he is disturbed by the son of the woman who stole the flowers and is about to attack Nikolai. But he deftly strikes him, and then the sullen men come back and deal with the boy, setting the conditions for tomorrow on all the graves of their friends to lay a bouquet. And before they leave, the men pay for Nikolai's work and leave the cemetery. In the evening he is already getting ready to meet the girl and shows his new suit to the girl, which she rates as quite nice. And when they pass through the cemetery together for the second time, Nikolai offers to switch to you, the girl agrees and leaves in the fog, and Nikolai returns alone and hears a strange noise. It turns out to be a sectarian summoning the Queen of Spades, or rather a little boy who had heard scary stories from his brother, so he decided to check how they work. Nikolai of course chased the boy away, but then noticed another silhouette among the trees, but could not catch up with him, so he only shouted threats in the back. At the main gate, the Secret Service agents are already waiting for him, telling him about a certain maniac who had killed 8 victims in just this month. They ask him to show them the place where he was chasing a sectarian and find an old building which the agents are going to check. But when they find homeless people's beds and kerosene there, they get out and leave the cemetery, asking Nikolai to call in case of any problems. And at night, when he is already asleep, his weapon goes down, and in the morning, after an alarm clock, he steps on his weapon. At this time, reporters outside are recording a report of the last 5 guards fleeing the place in fear. But Nikolai is no longer happy with their questions about mystical powers, so he just chases them away. And after a couple of minutes, his grandfather already comes to him, who presses for pity to put his son's tombstone, because he died in the service and the year is buried like a dog. Nikolai agrees to help the grandfather, but when uncle arrives, Kolya makes a fool of himself, telling the story that this grandfather was filmed reportage, so Vasily happy that his cemetery will be shown on television. At this time the guy and his sister come to the cemetery to bring flowers. And when Vasya finds out who ordered them to do this, he is amazed that he was able to foresee his death, because yesterday he drove a truck directly in front of the car from the oncoming lane. And the boy realizes that there is no longer a threat. he threatens Kolya that he will come to him tonight with the guys. So Kolya wastes no time and begins to prepare for a fight. As night falls, Kolya hears the sounds of motorcycles and turns off the lights. Outside, the men are already throwing Molotov cocktails, and Kolya's plan to throw tires at the robbers begins. His two accomplices drive off, and the restless vigilante runs away and breaks open the back gate. But in the meantime, a man in a robe runs through the woods and scares the hell out of him. And Kolya finds him already in an unearthed grave. The number of special agents turns out not to exist, and the man is unable to say a word. So in the morning, an ambulance takes him away with a broken leg. When the police arrive, Kolya has no intention of making a statement and asks when the special agents with the ambush will arrive, but the officer does not understand who he is talking about. Uncle Vazhya arrives at the cemetery and wonders what is happening next to his business. On the territory, he finds a sneaker in the burial pit and tries to get it. And the policeman at this time tells Kolya that he has been duped, and the things in that old crypt were left behind after they found his twin brother there, whose heart was bursting, and he had such an expression on his face as if he had seen the devil. The policeman leaves and notices Vazhya, who immediately bribes him to leave as soon as possible. And then the boss curses at Kolya for this mess and the fact that the police are in his cemetery, and at any second their basic mentality can come in the form of bandits. And closer to evening, a whole convoy of bandits arrives at the funeral of his twin brother, who recently crashed. Kolya is visited by the victim's sister and asked to put flowers on the grave of one of the bandits. And after all the visitors leave, a former security guard comes to him to pick up his backpack. He tells the story of how one night he was visited by a huge crowd of cultists from whom he was forced to flee. After that, of course, he wanted to increase his safety, but his budget was small, so he decided to prepare for the night with less dangerous materials. For example, fireworks and dogs. At night, Ira comes to him and he accompanies her as usual, but on the way they hear a dog barking, which turns out to be barking at the crypt. But when Kolya goes in to check, the boy is there again, and behind him you hear Ira screaming, but the door slams shut. The dog snaps and launches all the traps all over the place. And when Kolya breaks free, he runs into the second crypt, where he finds Ira, but with a sectarian, who turns out to be Konstantin, the first twin brother. And Kolya manages to defeat him and set him on fire. And when he comes out on the street, a whole crowd runs at him, but they shoot the fleeing man of fire. It turns out to be those special agents, one of whom tells that this brother was covered by the second, who himself has recently died. And Ira turns out to be the lieutenant who acted as bait for the maniac and a test for Kolya. He is disheartened, but approaches Ira and she promises to come see him tomorrow. The staff offers Kolya a rest, immediately informing him that Ira is unmarried. After waking up in the morning, he decides to cool off with water and walk around the cemetery looking at the consequences of his traps. But he forgets about one of them and it flies into his house, which causes an instant fire. Kolya tries to get rid of it, but all in vain, so he is left without a cabin. When the grandfather comes, he shows Kolya a photo of his son who passed away 2 years ago. And seeing a photo of the special agent on the tombstone, he checks the camera where he finds photos of Ira. And he does not understand what is reality and what is an illusion. Uncle Vazhya sees a report in which Kolya is portrayed as a mad guard possessed by evil spirits. At night, men in robes come to Kolya and call him to follow them. When he arrives on the scene, the twin brothers tell him that they are just hiding here and have been testing him on how fearless he is. And as a reward, they give him a bag of money. And when he comes out, he notices Ira, who tells him that it's her last day, it's time for her to leave. And after saying goodbye, she goes out into the fog and Kolya sees her off. Uncle Vazhya arrives and sees the devastation in his cemetery. So he gets in a car and finds Kolya with a bag of money and tries to run him over, but Kolya dodges and the uncle crashes into the tombstones. And then he wakes up and leaves the car, but when Kolya comes in, he finds Uncle's body in the car and tries to help him. Uncle's spirit, meanwhile, throws a tombstone at Kolya, but it hangs in the air, and Uncle's body wakes up and he leaves. The men in robes appear not far from Kolya and he thanks them for saving him from the tombstone, and with a nod, they leave in silence. In the morning, the cemetery is being cleaned up, and Kolya puts flowers on Ira's tombstone and decides to meet Galia. In a letter to his grandmother, he tells her that he met a new girl, paid off all his debts, and that Uncle Vazhya has changed a lot. And Kolya himself became the head of this cemetery. Right now, subscribe to the channel and like it it helps a lot in promotion. Also share your opinion about the video in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I won't say goodbye.